Hello, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Gina Smarecki. I am the Cybersecurity Events Manager at PDI, and I'll be your host for today's live session. So today's webinar is one of our most attended topics each quarter as we look at our threat findings from last quarter and share our analysis on the current trends in cybercrime. The full threat landscape report is now live and available to download from our website, and I'll be sharing that link in the chat for you all. If you have questions during the presentation, please submit them in the Q&A tab on the bottom of your screen, or the chat is fine as well. We'll be taking a look there, and we will try to leave a few minutes at the end for your questions. And just so everybody knows, we are recording this and we will send out an email tomorrow with a link to watch the recording, as well as all the other resources that we will be sharing today. All right. So before I introduce the speakers, I would just like to take a quick note. Since this is the first time the actual report is coming out under the new brand. So hopefully everyone's already heard this message, but it is a huge milestone in our 25-year journey in this industry. And Newspire has joined forces with PDI Technologies. We have worked on changing everything to our new name, which is PDI Security and Network Solutions. You can check out our new website for, more information about the transition. I'll pop that into the chat really quick. But it's important to note that we are still the same team with the same mission, and we've got a new name and a lot more resources behind us now. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce our speakers today, Justin Hurd and Josh Smith. Justin is the Director of Security Operations, and he brings over 16 years of cybersecurity experience. His career has been characterized by an excellence in a range of roles, from threat hunter to incident commander and intelligence analyst. He has extensive knowledge and a versatile skill set, and stands as a genuine authority in the field of security operations. And then we have Josh. Josh is our supervisor of threat intelligence. He works closely in organizational threat landscapes, curating threat intelligence, and authoring this quarterly threat landscape report. Josh holds a master's degree in cybersecurity technology, and previously he served with the U.S. Navy as an operations specialist with 14 years of service. Josh has been quoted in Forbes, CSO Online, Channel Futures, Dark Reading, Motor Magazine, and many others. And now I will turn it over to Josh to kick things off.
Thank you for Gina for the warm welcome as always, and thank you everyone for taking time out of your day to join us. Certainly appreciate it. First thing we want to do is just want to cover what are we going to look at today. So first thing we're going to look at is what is our methodology and overview. How do we get this data? What do we do with it once we get it? And then after that part, we'll break down into 3 different specific sections. We're going to look at ransomware, dark web activity, and exploits. And at the end of each one of those sections, we'll also cover remediation and some tips and things that you can do against all these different threats that we speak about today. And then after that, we'll wrap it up with a bow with some conclusions and recommendations.
All right, this is me. Just a quick overview of what we're looking at today, where this data came from and how we're using it and how you can use it moving forward. So we do gather this information from a plethora of sources. So we have open source intelligence that we gather from our own SIM data, from our hundreds of customers that we have, thousands of customers that we have that we're doing incident response for. So we're able to aggregate that and kind of figure out where the trends are, where we're seeing different attacks and what different types of attacks we're seeing. We kind of process that data, and ultimately we try to create detections out of it. Can we detect what we're seeing happening? Is there a new threat that is being used, or a new tactic that's being used that we can create detection around? So we'll do that. We'll evaluate to see if that threat intelligence is valuable for us, or those alerts valuable for us, and ultimately disseminate it. And that dissemination can change depending on who the stakeholders are. Today, you are the stakeholders for the quarterly threat report. So we're going to be delivering trend analysis on malware, ransomware, vulnerabilities. So this data will be really good for your organization to figure out where maybe you need to spend some more money, maybe where you need to change your tooling, so on and so forth.
All right, and to dive right into our first section here, ransomware. So ultimately, we saw about just shy of a 3% decrease in ransomware publications. If you're not familiar with what a ransomware publication is, once one of these threat actor groups performs an attack, what's very, very common is what's called a double extortion method. So not only have they attacked a victim and encrypted their network, they now have stolen data from them as well and are threatening to publish that publicly if the ransom's not paid. So we track a lot of these different ransomware operator sites, and based on the amount of publications they make, we get an idea of how successful they've been in attacks or not. So again, we saw just shy of a 3% decrease when we compare that against Q4, but it should be noted that specifically in Q4, we saw about a 46% increase in activity. So after that large surge, that activity has basically maintained all the way throughout Q1. As we look at our most active ransomware operators from Q1, the most active one was Clop Ransomware, which overtook Ransom Hub, which was one of the previous leaders. And then additionally, Akira Ransomware has continued to slowly work their way up the chart. They are now within the third position. There's a lot of headlines that are constantly coming out about this group. And then additionally now, Killin Ransomware jumped into fifth position there. They jumped over about 100% in activity when we compare that against Q4. So they are another very, very active group. Looking specifically at Akira, again, their growth continues to work its way up and trending, and have really cemented themselves at this point as a serious player within the ransomware space. They do target a large range of industries. We've seen across the board that they're basically going for targets of opportunity, those low-hanging fruit, if you will, that they're able to find and get a hold of. They're constantly scanning for different vulnerabilities. They're sending out phishing campaigns, and they do have a lot of focus towards small and medium businesses. If they don't find success with something like a phishing campaign, they also really like to focus on VPNs. They're looking at firewalls that have a VPN technology enabled, and they are looking at the known exploits that already exist out there and are just trying again and again and again towards all these different exposed VPNs until they find an organization that's behind on their patching, and that gives them access into the network. Additionally, another way that they're doing it is they're looking at dark web marketplaces, and they're buying valid credentials and accounts where these credentials have been stolen and are being resold by what's called initial access brokers. Those can be sold for as little as $10 a piece. Once they get access into the network, whether that be through the VPN, stolen credentials, a phishing campaign, etc., they at that point begin to work to escalate privileges within the network. They're looking to get a hold of an administrative account if they didn't already get one. Once they have something like that, they start to build their persistence. They start creating new accounts within the network. So if one account is alerted against or suspicious activity is detected and access is cut off from that, they can pivot to one of these other accounts that they've made to maintain within the network. At that point, they start to exfiltrate data out of the network. They're looking for anything that may be sensitive that an organization doesn't want publicly disclosed or sold. Customer information, financials, deals, anything like that. They're looking for those hard-hitting documents that they can steal and add that additional pressure to an organization to pay ransom, even if they have backups, to make sure that that data doesn't get released out into the wild. They've proven themselves to be quite a sophisticated group as well, too. One attack that happened during Q1 specifically, an organization did have EDR deployed across their network. They were trying to deploy ransomware binary onto machines and execute it. The EDR found it and was stopping it. They maintained access into the network and searched around, and they found a vulnerable security camera that was on the network that ran off Linux. They pivoted over that camera, and their binary also works via Linux. So once they got access to this vulnerable security camera that was way behind on patches, they were able to create network shares across the network. And through those network shares, they ran the encryption off the security camera and encrypted all those files across the shared networks. They're very creative, and we go way farther in depth into some of their tactics, techniques, and procedures in the report. So I certainly invite you all to get into the report as well, too, to dive a little deeper. As we look at industry specifically when it comes to ransomware, the professional and technical services industry still remained the most extorted industry witnessed. It did find a 18% decrease when compared against Q4. But on the other side, the retail sector surged dramatically when compared against Q4 by about 74%. Retail businesses are very attractive to these threat actors as well because, again, that data that they handle, there's financial transactions, customer databases that are filled with PII. And generally, a lot of retail businesses have a low tolerance for operational downtime because that downtime costs money. So with that, also a lot of retail businesses rely on tons of different third-party vendors, and that can introduce a lot of different supply chain attacks and risks involved from those. So again, just due to, in general, the amount of data that retail organizations have and that low tolerance for downtime, ransomware is still very, very interested in finding that and getting into those networks and exploiting them. I'll turn that over to Justin for some mitigation and response.
Thank you, Josh. A lot of detail around ransomware. So the big question is how do we keep ourselves from being part of those statistics? We have a few things here. Josh actually mentioned a couple that I'll cover as well. Endpoint detection and response. So an EDR agent is actually a piece of software that goes on your computer that stops attacks happening on the device level. These can be very useful. They use heuristics to try to detect just suspicious activity as opposed to like an AV engine that just looks at hash. So these can be very helpful. I would always recommend some type of EDR solution on your endpoints because the edge is very hard to secure, and even if we secure the edge, we have users. And so the bottom one here, user awareness and training. Josh mentioned phishing campaigns. There's many ways for the user to actually infect their system that propagates across the entire network. So we'll talk a little bit more about some things like least privilege and so on and so forth that we can do to help that from not spreading, segregating the network from those users. But cybersecurity awareness training is very important. Phishing training is very important. And so I would definitely invest in that. The middle one here, data backup and recovery plan. Recovery plan and data backup is very important. There's usually not much you can do once you're encrypted other than pay the ransom or recover your systems from known good backup. If you don't have a known good backup, you may be building from scratch, which definitely costs a lot of money to rebuild systems and resources and so on and so forth. So all these things really start with a plan. If this happens to my company, what are we going to do? That's a very important start. And then just kind of figure out, do I have the things in place to recover if this server goes down or is encrypted? Or just a few things we can do to try to help us protect. And I'll mention this quite a few times throughout this webinar. A layered approach to security is very important. There's not just one silver bullet that's going to keep you from getting ransomware. It's a combination of all the things that we're going to talk about today.
Thank you, Justin. And yeah, just real quick to hit that layered defense portion of it. One of our recommendations were EDR, but just a moment ago, that organization I mentioned still fell victim to ransomware because of it. And ultimately, patch management was the other piece of it, which I promise we'll beat to death here when we get to the exploit section too. But yeah, layered defense. There is no single silver bullet, as Justin put it, that's going to ultimately protect everything. You need all those different catch-alls and those disaster recovery plans and all those things. I digress. As we move into dark web markets, we take a look at our listings here. We saw almost a 40% decrease when we compare that against Q4. That activity did begin to trend back up, though, as we approached the end of Q1. So Luma Stealer is one of the most popular info stealers or information stealers that you'll find on dark web marketplaces. A lot of the activity that we see on dark web marketplaces is very closely tied to the activity levels of Luma. And so ultimately, organizations should have a focus on information stealers and the different tactics of how those are deployed as part of their user awareness training. They can harvest credentials that are on devices. They can scrape browsers to take, if any of your users are ever saving their credentials in like Google Chrome or Firefox, it can scrape all that stuff out of it. Additionally, there's other things it can look for too, like sessions, and piggyback off of all those things. Those initial access brokers will take all that information, they'll bundle it up, and they'll put it on a dark web marketplace and put it for sale. And as I was mentioning, the drive of activity with Luma specifically, if you still have the dark web market overall graph in your head, you'll see it looks very similar to the Luma Stealer one. As Luma Stealer's activity has begun to trend back up, we're starting to see that activity rise again as a whole. And you may ask, well, why did the activity drop off at all? A lot of times these threat actor groups or these malware authors that make these sorts of things, they'll take breaks. They'll take a step back as security personnel and organizations start to discover their tactics. They reverse engineer what they're doing. They've got to go back to the drawing board and kind of recreate their malware, or they may just be adding new features and things like that to it. And during that time frame, you'll see a lull. As we see, though, activity is starting to pick back up again. Luma first appeared in 2022. It quickly dominated the info stealer space once it showed up. And a lot of that has to do with because of how easy it is for threat actors to use. They have built-in support systems for threat actors that are using it. If they think a feature is not working right, or if they're trying to install it on a network and that's not going the way they planned, they can reach back out to the authors and their support team to get help on using it. Very similar to any vendors you probably work with and you need support on a product that you have. It's sold through multiple channels. It's sold on these dark web marketplaces. It's sold on underground forums. And they've done a lot of migration now towards things like Telegram and Signal and Discord servers that are invite only and very niche in making sure that the people that are involved are actual threat actors. From there, they can target anything from Windows 7 to Windows 11. And it's often deployed through one of these things we call malvertising campaigns. That's where, any organization can buy Google ads and push something up to the top of a search. The threat actors will also purchase ads and push up a fake website for, maybe a free PDF converter or something like that. And instead of getting a free PDF converted, you get an info stealer instead. Along with things like that, they're often tied into things like pirated software. And another huge trend that's really started to pick up is something that's called click fix. I'm sure all of you are familiar with a CAPTCHA of where you go to a website, you have to prove you're not a robot, and you get the little pop-ups and things like that. Well, these pop-ups that aren't real CAPTCHAs are social engineering a user into running malicious commands on their computer. These prompts will pop up. It'll ask them to copy and paste this code into their Windows command line to verify their computer or to uncorrupt a document they downloaded or something like that. What it's really doing is it's running malicious PowerShell scripts and pulling down an info stealer from there and deploying that on their computer. So again, circling back about user awareness training of things like that, ClickFix is a perfect example of something that users should be aware of.
Thank you for that, Josh. Some dark web mitigation and responses to some of the things that Josh talked about in the last slide there. Implementing a dark web monitoring and threat intelligence service is very helpful. It's being proactive in trying to discover what threat actors are trying to do, what they have, if they do have any of your data, if they did steal credentials, what types of tools they're using. So being proactive and having a service or a software that's crawling the dark web for you to see if anything pops up related to your company can really help you get ahead of an attack. So if you see credentials that are out there, you can start to do credential resets. You can see if they already have access. If some PII ends up on the dark web for some reason that mentions your name, you can figure out where it came from and potentially find where the threat actors are in the network. So that is a very good tool when it comes to dark web mitigation, or some of the attacks that are being used using valid credentials and so on and so forth. This again, implementing a comprehensive cybersecurity measure, layered defense, right? Making sure we have all the things that we're talking about today as far as EDR, segregation of networks, next generation firewalls, vulnerability management, and a good patch program, and a plan, right? A plan to be able to respond to these things as they're happening. I think educating and training users, again, is something very important here. Josh mentioned SEO poisoning, where a threat actor will do things to make sure that their website pops up before the website that you're looking for. The example he gave was a PDF reader. We see this all the time. We see it all the time. You're used to just typing in what you're looking for. You click on the top link. It looks just like the application you're looking for. You download it, and now you have malware on your machine, or they're harvesting credentials through a browser extension or some other piece of malware that they installed. So that user awareness, just double check, when you're looking for that program, to make sure that it is a replicable source, and making sure that that source is good before you download malware onto your machine. The other thing here in the middle here, enhancing data protection and privacy. You'll hear us mention VPNs a lot, vulnerable VPNs, vulnerable external facing services. Anywhere we can implement MFA is going to be very, very helpful, particularly around valid credentials, right? So if they harvest credentials from someone's machine and they have a username and password, but they don't have that third piece of authentication, you can stop them from getting into the network, or at least slow them down. So that is always important to have on any external facing application, or any application at all that requires authentication through the business.
I want to take a quick second here. I see there's a couple questions here from Reed, and just want to address those real quick. The question is not that it should be relied on, but can EDR such as Coro detect someone failing for a click fix threat? I'll be honest with you, I don't know the full capabilities of Coro, but I will specify in general that EDRs are usually pretty good at detecting a malicious PowerShell script of something of that nature. Those scripts will reach out to processes and engage things that normally wouldn't happen. And that's the beauty of EDR. As Justin mentioned before, your standard antivirus, for example, is looking purely for a hash. A hash is instantly switchable from a threat actor, from changing a single character within it. And that hash, as far as your AV, is no longer valid as a signature. The EDR side of things looks at that behavior. It looks at the heuristics to say, should PowerShell be reaching out and doing the thing that it's trying to do? So again, most modern EDRs are looking for sorts of things like that. Ultimately, if you have a question about that specifically, I'd recommend reaching out to your vendor and challenge them, ask that question. They should be able to tell you whether or not. Some EDRs do allow you the ability to create custom rules and things like that. And so there might be an option there as well. And then additionally, Reed also asked, what would be recommended alternatives for employees who have saved credentials in browsers? For my recommendation personally is we use things like password managers. You can get those browser-based ones. They do the auto logins into the different login prompts as they pop up. They allow you to have unique, complex credentials and manage them to where you only need the user to have one password they never use anywhere else but for that password manager. And if they're truly only using it in that one spot, you really should never ever see that in a credential leak somewhere. That can also help pinpoint if you do see a rogue password leaked somewhere, where did that come from per se? And so, yeah, jumping now back into the next section though, and thank you very much, Reed, for the questions. Appreciate that. But jumping into our exploits here, we did see a slight decrease in exploit activity But I do want to call out that in Q4, we had a pretty good surge in activity. And again, that has maintained throughout Q1. And near the end of Q1, we did see another large increase starting to jump up again. And a lot of that is driven specifically through what I would suspect to be mostly automated vulnerability abuse. Again, as I mentioned, a lot of these threat actors are looking for low-hanging fruit. Don't get me wrong, certain organizations may have a specific advanced persistent threat group that's interested in a specific intellectual property that you may have, but the biggest threat as a broad whole to organizations is ransomware. And those ransomware groups are constantly scanning exposed devices and looking for things that are behind on patches. One of the things, as we mentioned in the Akira portion of the ransomware earlier, is a camera system. Hikvision camera systems are being very highly targeted from some old but powerful vulnerabilities. They're looking for an exposed camera that is just never had the firmware updated on it. And if they can get access to that, they can begin to get into the network and pivot into other places. And then another big thing in general here is we are seeing, it continued from Q4, a major focus on VPNs. It's very easy to kind of understand why threat actors would be so interested in a VPN. It is the gateway into your network. And once they have access into that, either through an exploit where maybe they can get control of the VPN itself, or they're just going to be using, again, these valid credentials they're finding from a dark web marketplace or an info stealer or something of that nature. They can get into the VPN. They now have the keys to get wherever basically they want throughout the device. So again, we saw a large surge specifically in Avanti Connect Secure near the end of Q1. And these were, again, two older vulnerabilities that were being targeted. Within that too, we are also seeing a lot of focus on different firewall technologies that have VPNs baked into them. Things like Cisco, Citrix, Fortinet, and Palo Alto's. All of them, we saw increases across the board as far as threat actor targeting. And so again, there's such a focus on VPNs because if they can get into those devices, they now have access into your network and can move wherever they need to. So cannot stress enough about patch management. And just where things like threat intelligence can help you when it comes to a critical vulnerability. I've got 5 new ones that just dropped today. Which one do I patch first? Well, we want to look at things that are on the external side of the network first. Your VPNs, those things that are exposed. Does the exploit have a known proof of concept for it already? Or I should say the vulnerability already have a known proof of concept. Do we know threat actors are actively attacking it or not compared to something else? All those things can help you prioritize what to patch first. And then the very last thing I'll stand on my soapbox and say is stressing about multi-factor authentication on your VPNs. There are so many case studies and news articles and things like that that we read about these cyber attacks that something as simple as multi-factor authentication on the VPN could have likely prevented the attack. It was a valid credential that a threat actor got from a dark web forum, or maybe they just brute forced the login and constantly tried different combinations of usernames and passwords until they finally got one that worked. Multi-factor authentication could have been the difference between them being a headline or an unsuccessful attack.
So let's jump into some mitigations for these vulnerabilities and exploits that Josh has been talking about. He mentioned it, and I'll mention it again. Speedy system patching is crucial. That starts with knowing what's in your infrastructure, having a good inventory of the different softwares that you're using, the remote access software that's allowed to be used in your network, what remote access do you have into other systems, and what, if someone was to get into the VPN, what do they have access to? Is there segregation in the network to keep them from getting to your crown jewels, right? Using a firewall with IPS. IPS has pretty good signatures to detect when certain exploits are being used. Just the way the URI comes through, or other information in the packet itself that can let them know that, hey, there's a potential that this thing's being exploited. But knowing what different systems and software that you have helps with that, because you can know if the exploit or the IPS event that's triggering is something that actually affects you, or potentially false positive. Monitoring security news and vendor security bulletins. This is a big thing that can be overlooked sometimes. Just getting the information and knowing that something's out there is a step ahead of a lot of organizations, right? They just don't look for these things until one guy was like, hey, I thought there was this vulnerability in this thing, and it turns out a week later, when you guys finally figure out that you have it, it's already been exploited. So keeping on top of these security news bulletins will definitely let you know when there's something to do. And there's once you know your inventory and what software, you'll know what vendors that you should be monitoring. And then disabling unused services. Anything that's open to the internet, that's not being used, unencrypted data transfers, things like that. Just make sure that those don't exist inside of your network. Vulnerability scanning is a very good thing to do to kind of figure out where you're at. There's a lot of online tools that hackers use to just scan and say, hey, show me all the vulnerable X, right? All the vulnerable cameras, all the vulnerable firewalls that are vulnerable to the CVE. And they can very easily scan and figure that stuff out. And that's where they're going to go, right? Like Josh said, in some cases, there will be some threat actors that are very interested in your particular organization for whatever reason. But for the majority of the time, it's just someone trying to get financial gain, either through ransomware or extortion or other means. Throughout your network. So these are just a few things that we can do to try to make sure that we're protected as possible from these exploits. But again, no silver bullet here. This is just a piece of the puzzle when it comes to protecting your network. And so I'm going to wrap all this up with recommendations and just give you kind of the top 6 things and a summary of each. And I think we've talked about why it's important, but educate your users often, know what they should be looking out for. That also comes with looking at what tactics and techniques are being used, what are threat actors doing, what type of social engineering techniques are we seeing out there, because they do change. They change up who they're talking to, who they're talking from. AI has really had an impact on this area. It used to be easier to detect when you had some type of social engineering attack, and it's getting harder and harder. So just having that state of mind where you're just suspicious enough of every engagement that you have that it may catch something, right? It's maybe something just a little off that gets you to go to your security team, and that starts with training. Taking a layered approach, like we've said throughout this, there's not one thing that you should be doing. There's multiple things, but you have to find somewhere to start. And I think the biggest thing to start with would probably be log collection, EDR, and then some type of vulnerability scan to figure out where you're at, where your holes are, and if you have any infections or any machines that are susceptible to particular attacks. Patching your tech stack is very important. So getting those patches out as quick as possible, kind of having a change control where you can get those pushed out quickly, obviously without taking down the network. I know it's difficult when it comes to patch management, but it is very important. And I would say 80 to 90% have to of IRs that we work have to do with something not being patched or an open VPN without MFA. And then the last piece of that would be a user, social engineering. And so we've touched on all those things today. Updating your malware protection, a lot of them update by themselves, but just making sure that's happening. Segregating your high-risk devices. First of all, knowing where your high-risk devices are and what would happen if they were to be encrypted, so you can have a plan to move forward. And this is where you come back to talking about backups and things like that, to be able to recover if something is to happen. And then the last one, utilize threat intelligence. There's a lot of information out there. But it starts with really understanding what to prioritize, and threat intelligence can really help you with that. What's important to my organization that I need to patch right now, as opposed to what's, it's something we should patch, but it's not actively being exploited, and we don't have that particular application, or we do, but it's in another side of the network. But this thing is open. We have proof of concepts. We know that it's being actively exploited. Let's get that done first. So just prioritizing based off that intelligence and information that you collect. We talked about the credential leaks and mentions on the dark web can also help us get ahead of all of that. And I'll turn it over to Gina.
Awesome. All right. Thank you. And thank you both for sharing all those highlights and recommendations from the newest report. So we have plenty of time left for questions. If anybody has any more, there's a few in there that I already see. I'm just going to run through these resources, and then we can go to questions. But at this time, I'd like to quickly mention our next webinar, which will be around the topic of SOC as a service and AI. So I will go ahead and share a link to that in the chat for anyone who might be interested in attending. That's May 21st. And then I'd like to quickly also share the link to the full threat report, the one that we've been talking about. There's a lot more to dig into there. So do go to the site and grab the actual report. It's free. And you'll have that to review, as well as there's a link to the press release that went out along with the report, and a link to our cybersecurity section of resources that are all free on our website. So feel free to browse that whenever you are looking for information. And all right, so let's go to questions. I saw something in the chat. Question here from Mike. So how do we get notifications to know where people are being hacked?
I can take that, Gina. And so, Mike, there's a bunch of different resources out there in the world when it comes to staying up on cyber news in general. Some of them are commercial, some of them are open source. And honestly, some of my favorite places to go to is I love bleepingcomputer.com. It's a great summary of cyber attacks, threat actors, and in general, kind of what's going on in cybersecurity. It's a great place that stays updated daily, and you can get an idea, like I said, of what's going on there. Another good place to keep an eye on is always the CISA, or Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agencies advisories. You can subscribe to those and get those advisories just sent to you via email. That will give you a bunch of different campaigns that are going on, things that are targeting different industry sectors. And one of the most important things when it comes for vulnerability management and knowing what to patch next is they have their known exploited vulnerability catalog. You can get notifications when a new vulnerability is added to that, and that can help you prioritize your patching. So there's a tons of different places out there, other news sites, but those are some of my favorite places to go.
All right. Thank you, Josh. Thank you for the question also. Let's see. So a couple of other comments that are coming in. If you guys have any comments on we had a user fall for click fixing, going back to the click fixing, they had Defender picked it up. So he was just kind of confirming that whatever they were using worked for that. So that was kind of interesting. Picked up on the PowerShell commands within a few seconds. Any comments on Defender for that?
Yeah, I can speak to that. And that's a perfect example of EDR working well, right? Even if you don't, catch the initial infection, right? You don't catch the user installing what it is that's being installed. There's always actions that happen after. And a lot of times they're PowerShell, right? That's something that EDR is very good at picking up. Encrypted PowerShell commands, it's very good at detecting that. So that's a great example of how EDR can help you there. And stop that activity, right? And know the difference between something that's being done by an admin and something that is malicious. And sometimes it's wrong. but I'd rather it be wrong and take the precautions to block and mitigate, so you give you time to address that and look at it further, than the alternative, which is that executes. There's persistence on that machine, and they start installing and laterally moving across the network. So that's a great example of where EDR can help, specifically on click fixing. And I saw Reed put in here, example of high risk device. The Windows 95 VIN etching machine has a sticker on it that says, on the Ethernet port, says "Do not connect to the internet." True story. I believe it, and there's probably a lot of stories like that. You would be surprised, where you have organizations that are very serious about security, and they have a patch management program, and they have Intel, and they have EDR, and they have segregation and firewalls with IPS and so on and so forth. And then they have this machine that they've been using for decades, that has an open RDP to some backend system that's never been patched, and that's how the attackers get in. You would be surprised at how many, or not, maybe how many stories there are that are like that, where all this money spent on security, and they use something that was kind of forgot about. And that's where it comes back to really understanding what's in your network, what's exposed, and what you can do to lock that down. Not plugging to the internet works too, right?
Yeah, interestingly too, you're talking about, the back room device or something of that nature. It happens a lot in the medical industry as well too. And I was kind of curious why it was happening so much there. And folks may or may not know, but a lot of that has to do with the fact of, because they're interacting with patients in their healthcare, these organizations that are making that software are really, really hesitant to ever release a patch and update it, because if there's a bug or something that in there, it can affect a human life in some way, shape, or form. So once they get it working on Windows XP, they just leave it and try to never touch it. But unfortunately, that introduces a security risk into an organization. And it circles back to the segregating the network and high risk devices and things like that. You have a whole VLAN or something like that created to keep all those super high risk devices off to the side. So if unfortunately they are compromised in some way, shape, or form, it really limits where the threat actors can go to.
Awesome. All right, moving on to our next question here. We do have a few more minutes left. So, why do threat actors continue to attack older vulnerabilities even when new ones are announced? Do you want to take that one, Josh?
Sure. Yeah. Ultimately, because they still work. They are constant. It's such an easy thing for them to do as well too, just to set up that automated scanning and look at server headers that they can scrape out that's on Apache version, whatever, and see, hey, I'll just try to run this exploit against it and see if it works. If it doesn't, okay, I'll jump to the next IP address. And the thing is it is working somewhere. Maybe it's 1,000 more IPs down the lane, but because it's working, they continue to do it. Generally speaking, when you're looking at like financially motivated threat actors, they will go just as low as the bar is set. They're not trying to get crazy with insane sophisticated attacks in some wild 0-day, because they don't have to. There's still so many organizations out there that are behind on patching or have an unsecure port or service or something like that. They can just take advantage of it. And until that bar is raised as a total cybersecurity community, that's what they're going to keep doing.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. And I see another one here. I have a small business and not a lot of budget. What's some of the best bang for my buck I can do to help protect my company? I'll
I
give
can
that
take
one.
that one.
Yep.
I think just finding somewhere to start. My biggest things to start with is log collection, right? Can you collect the logs? And then probably secondly is EDR. And having EDR on the endpoints really helps to be able to detect those things. There's a lot of open source options when it comes to log collection. You can look up a thing called Elk Stack, which is a combination of Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana, which basically gives you a free SIM, other than the data storage, right? there's a lot of options when it comes to that when collecting logs, and you can create alerts and things around that. And then having some sort of EDR and then a firewall in place. And then some of the generalized best practice, right? The two-factor authentication is very important. The segregation, the closing out unused ports, the whitelisting remote applications that are allowed to be used within your organization can be things that can be really helpful there. There's a lot of open source information and intelligence that's out there. Josh mentioned some of the security advisories. There's also some technical indicators out there like IPs, URLs, domains that you can get for free. There's, X has a lot of researchers on there that share information that can be useful as far as intelligence goes. Is setting up RSS feeds to get your intelligence. There's a lot of options there for a small business when it comes to security, and it's just kind of finding a place to start, getting some logs collected, getting some software deployed, and finding a place to get good information on what you should be doing.
All right. Thank you, Justin. I think that is all our questions for today that I see. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up for today. If you have any other questions, please email us at securitywebinars@pditechnologies.com or contact us through our website. We will make sure to get those questions to the right folks. Also, upon exiting this webinar, there is a short survey that will pop up, and we'd certainly appreciate any feedback that you have for us today. And with that, I'll ask for any closing thoughts from Josh and Justin.
Ultimately, just once again, thank you all for taking time out of your busy days and spending some time with us to go through this data. And I really hope to see you all in the next one. And please go download the report and read through the rest of the details we just didn't have time to cover today.
Yep, same. Thank you for joining us today. It's always good when we can get together and share some information when it comes to security and work against the bad guys, right, to try to better protect ourselves. I appreciate everyone's time, and we'll see you next quarter.
Awesome. All right. Well, on behalf of PDI Security and Network Solutions and our presenters, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Later.